Hey everyone. So we're back for another live. I wanted to talk a bit more about the Telepathy Tapes podcast. And so many of you have probably had a chance to listen to a little bit more of it. And because I think and I feel that we're really at a moment of convergence between these intersections of neurocomplexity, giftedness, and larger spiritual questions. And I feel that the Telepathy Tapes podcast does an excellent job in really focusing these questions, focusing the issues in at a point of convergence that makes it really easily relatable for many different contexts. Now, if you haven't yet, you can watch my previous live that I did a few weeks ago on which gives more of an overview of the podcast and an overview of some of the themes that I feel it brings up, which are really important. One of these is the question of materialism in science and the materialist paradigm. So that's been falsified, legit. You can watch my previous live. I go over like the specific reasons, like some of the largest, not even arguments, it's just data. Basically, you only need one real counterexample to falsify a paradigm, to falsify a theory. So watch my previous live for that. And here though, like I just wanted to try to dig in a bit more on some of the specific questions that the possibility of telepathy raises, because it's something in the concept is it's more of a thread that we can pull at to unravel larger relationships. I think it's pretty clear that the concept of telepathy, which is we've had an intuition about it obviously for as long as we've been human probably. But there's something with the concept that obviously needs an upgrade or further analysis. And this is because of the larger phenomena that it really connects to about the nature of reality and the nature of our universe, which is consciousness. So one of these questions, and I'm just like working with some mind maps here, so I'm going to jump around a little bit, but don't want to get into like these questions first. So what we're really dealing with is the question of like individuality, and at what level, for example, does individuality begin to merge with higher levels of consciousness? And so for me, one of the first questions that watching or listening to these tapes really raised for me is that it's clear that the population of these particular autistic kids is like a really awesome demonstrative case like for the podcast, but it's clear that the phenomenon extends well beyond just non-speaking autistic kids or autistic individuals. And I went back to listen to a bit more, episode 6 I believe, and it's really wild because it gets into like animal telepathy, which is an area that I have like a particular fondness for. And they're bringing up the case of like Rupert Sheldrake, who you're probably familiar with. He's a Cambridge, I think, biologist, trained as a biologist, who I would say he's like a really good example of authentic science. And what I mean by that is if you take the ideal projection of what the scientific method is and should be, it's to follow the evidence. And if you find a counterexample that falsifies an existing theory or hypothesis, you're supposed to question and replicate the counterexample. That's what progress is. And that's basically what Rupert Sheldrake ran into. And he, after a conversation he had with like Sir Rudolph Peters, was introduced to a very similar case. I didn't know about this one, where he was talking with a blind and disabled child who was able to, it's almost the exact same story, but this is in the 1950s before all of our current psychological categories. So probably he wasn't considered autistic. But he was able to read, like, those eye charts in doctor's offices and it measures the quality of your vision. He was blind, but if his mother was in the room with him, he was able to still read these eye charts. And they took a while for them to figure it out. But then once the mother left, I don't know, she went to elsewhere, another building, maybe, I forget. but then he wasn't able to see these charts anymore. He couldn't read. So long story short, basically, if you want to know more about Rupert Sheldrake, he has a book. I actually haven't read it, but they talk more. It impressed me how many, the level of like the controlled studies that he's actually done on, for example, dogs that know when their owner is coming home. I think that's the title of the book. So if you want to go and grab that. Um, but basically, like, I think then Sheldrake worked into like adjacent examples, and other people started contacting him. So you know already how crazy intelligent African gray parrots are. They have an awesome story of this one who was, they're not just like linguistically intelligent. So here again is another interesting point of contradiction, right? It's not the non-speaking quality that really matters here in terms of telepathy, because you have these African gray parrots who are able to, like, their linguistic processing is off the charts. You don't even have to teach them everything, and then they're able to, construct new sentences, new concepts, use them in a new situation that they weren't taught. Well, there was this one African gray parrot who had such a close relationship with her owner that even so she would sleep in the same room at night, and the parrot would end up, she could comment on the woman's dreams. So you'd have to like read into the details of like how they learned this, how she learned this. Maybe the parrot woke her up at some point, and I'm sure they probably went to record through the night. But that's crazy. So you've got this so-called telepathic connection, and then the parrot is actually commenting on her dreams. Okay, how wild is that? And then, and he brings up another example too in this animal telepathy category. You've heard this story. It's an older one, about this herd of elephants who learned that their caretaker had passed away, and they were like 12 hours or something away at the time. Like, they traveled huge distances. And obviously nobody told the elephants that their owner had passed away, but they somehow picked up on this, and they walked for over a day to like return and pay their respects to their caretaker. And then on top of that, what's even crazier is that somehow these elephants were so in tune to the human calendar, which is this arbitrary division we have of the months and the weeks, and they knew the exact day, and they returned on the anniversary of this man's death. So how would we explain this on a fundamental level in terms of the type of connection that's happening here? Because we already have very different types of links and scenarios, right? It's not about autism. It's not even about like speaking or non-speaking. And it goes beyond just the visual world. So it's one thing maybe if someone is seeing something in a book that someone's reading, for example. Another category is to see the dreams, which is just mental. And then another aspect of this too is this question of the timing, right? Elephants knowing the exact calendar day. So what would you propose, for example, as this hypothesis that could connect all of these scenarios? And so this is what I'll just suggest here, but it's been discussed that, and it relates also to Rupert Sheldrake's conception of morphic fields, which other scientists have also worked with. There are different versions and varieties of this. Others have tried to contribute to the theory by kind of like correcting or pointing out areas where the morphic field theory should be like tweaked a little bit. But basically this idea of the fact that there are fields of intention, which they're transpersonal. They don't pertain to just one human mind. They can be accessed by others, and they carry some quality within consciousness that is, thank you, some quality in consciousness that enables the translation or the sharing of meaning across modalities, vision, speech, memory. And right, so these fields of intention actually, if you follow like a lot of the breadcrumbs of new kinds of how would I say this, like really deep theories of reality that can still stay coherent with the best of the empirical knowledge that we do currently have. So these aren't just like totally ungrounded, right? We've got actual legit authentic science happening that is studying on this level. So this idea of there being fields of intention, there's two other super legit respected scientists working in this area. You probably know Dr. Dean Radin. And if you want to talk about like controlled studies and like going way beyond the gold standard for what can be considered admissible empirical evidence, Dean Radin is who you want to look at. And he even wrote a book with like magic is in the title too. And he's not intimidated by this. He goes beyond like double blind studies to like triple blind and beyond. So check him out. And then another cool example is Dr. Bill Bankston. And I think he works at I think it's the University of Virginia or within their system. And he has worked on remote healing with mice and really, really complex multiple studies showing, for example, mice who healed from cancer. And, okay, so the ethics of some of this aside, maybe, I think a lot of these mice, some of them, like they naturally developed cancer. Anyway, so it's, I forgot all the details of the study, but it basically he documented the actual remote healing through intention, through like group resonance with these mice. And yeah, really, so you could look that up too. But the point is just like this legit science, this authentic science that's actually just following the phenomena and trying to like find a theory that can actually support these phenomena. So whether it's called, this is like anomalous phenomena because it falls outside like current, still accepted sort of like dogmatic materialist paradigms in science, which again, they've already been falsified. So we're left hanging in this space. And so the telepathy tapes comes in here and really just like pulls a lot of this up by the roots. Now, where will I go from here? So some of the questions this raises, again, it doesn't have to do just with autism, but there is more involved with what we currently understand as telepathy. And one of the impressions I had watching or listening to these series is that these kids, I mean, it's probably easy to demonstrate that not all non-speaking autistic children have these abilities. And so it seems to me that they could be part of some type of soul group. And, what's that? What is a soul group? And if consciousness is the fundamental reality that we are made of, that we are modulations of, at what point do we cease in our individuality, so to speak, and begin to like merge with these higher levels of consciousness? So in the tapes, they talk a lot about how the kids they were able to like access some kind of shared blackboard or shared canvas on which their mother's thoughts or what she was reading, as if it was like came up on a screen, and they were just able to like access the screen as soon as it was up there. So, and I think some of the mothers raised the question too, like, well, how is he accessing my mind? And it just raises the question of what are the boundaries of, someone's mind versus these areas that other people can access? And this ties right into like questions about survival after death, because if the so-called survival hypothesis is true, and we do continue in some form, which we do, like we've already seen evidence of consciousness continuing, like even 3 hours after death. There's really cool documentation of that. Again, I talked about that in my first live on this. So if it continues after death, like at what point does the individual soul really start to merge with like higher levels into like a soul group? Like some people have discussed the higher self, even in terms of a shared consciousness. So it seems to me that like there's a real spectrum, and as we go like sort of higher up or into like higher dimensions or more or higher frequencies, we do have more of this shared element. And so individuality itself is kind of a very dense concept. It's like we descend through these dimensions, and here we are in this very dense, the most dense dimension, this 3D dimension, where we're almost like we are living inside the density. We're no longer like looking at the density or somehow distinct from the density. Here we have bodies, we have density, we have merged with density. And so I had a feeling about this where I think it's really interesting. Like if you've ever found yourself thinking things like, oh, if I could just clone myself, then I could also do like XYZ with my life. And when I was a lot younger, I used to think like that. And it's funny now because with what we're doing with AI, we do have this type of cloning, also in a literal sense, right? With like the avatars people are creating to like literally just be a simulacra of who they are and what they would say. And it's almost like this is really like peak density. This is like the peak extension of the projection of consciousness into this realm, because now like we're not just like embodied with our own density, but now we're just doing this further projection of this complete simulacra of that experience. And again, it's kind of like when if you know photography, like old school, like changing the depth of focus, like there's a depth of focus that you can reach here where individuality is kind of like properly embodied, and you can like pull back from that into like higher registers, or if you, I guess it would be the other way around, a more shallow depth of focus, for example, like you're out of this range, this ideal range for what we currently experience. And like AI is on the other side of that. That's kind of how I see this. So that's one of the questions that this phenomena raises for me. The other is questions about like the reliability or the so-called signal in a telepathic experience. For example, some have mentioned that this is more likely to occur between people who already have like deep emotional resonance. So between partners, again, between animals and their owners. And so it's about this emotional resonance. So it does raise the question of, are we still even using an accurate paradigm for thinking about it? Because we're trying to apply this paradigm from communication theory, from information theory, where you've got senders and receivers and signals. But is it really like that? Is telepathy the accurate concept for this phenomenon? And is information theory like even an accurate paradigm anymore for this phenomenon, which we haven't even explored in depth? How can I know what type of so-called signal I'm receiving if I start feeling or perceiving a certain way? How would I identify the source of that? How would I separate that from my own projections, my own thoughts and feelings? So these are some of the issues that would have to be really sorted out, because it's easy to like celebrate, rah, 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 let's go telepathy. But on a practical level, right, you can see why there's just so much gray area in here, and why it's not really, I feel like the information theory paradigm probably isn't suited to this. Also, because I feel like telepathy isn't quite the right concept. Like we're dealing with something a lot more complex. So, so here, I guess I'll say, like, I'll just transition because as I've been like going back to listen to some more of the telepathy tapes, I've been talking with a friend about this who we're actually going to do we're going to have a little conversation on here, whether it's a podcast, we're just going to sit together and talk, and we're going to broadcast that shortly, soon-ish, for you guys. And, she is also, working in this like gifted neurocomplex spirituality kind of intersection that I am. And she's also a specialist in like trauma healing and recovery. And we've just been having like really cool talks. And so I thought it would just be awesome to just kind of like formalize it a little bit and share it with you guys. So definitely, whenever you see this, if you want to like drop any questions in the comments, then we can try to like incorporate that too into our talk. So, and I think that might be happening like within the next 2 weeks. So just keep an eye on my page. You'll see it go up. So yeah, so her name is Vida, and she has a theory of telepathy based on her own embodied experience of autism and giftedness and neurocomplexity and trauma recovery. And so we've been talking a lot about, things like blocks to telepathy and the importance and the role of the body. Again, this density that we were just talking about, that's really key to this earth experience. And the um, the intuition that a lot of these autistic kids had about one of the requirements for telepathy being a kind of like purity of mind, a purity of perception. I think they put it something like, you can't lie and still have this ability. Like you have to already be living on the full level of truth. And so Vida had some really cool comments and thoughts on that, which I hope we'll talk about. So yeah, so there's a lot of other questions in here, for example, on blocks to telepathy. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, I didn't know that. I'll bring that up. Yeah, just a comment in the chat on the meaning of her name in Spanish. She's not Spanish, but like I'll mention it. We'll see. It's a beautiful name. So blocks to telepathy. Another one is likely the presence of judgment, which is related to things like lying, to feeling like maybe you have to hide a part of yourself. This is related to self-judgment. And so this is really about like vibrating out of that frequency, like moving beyond self-judgment. And again, though, I think it still involves this sense of these fields of intention, which maybe allow us to direct consciousness or to modulate consciousness into a certain formation, because we're not just dealing with some homogenous type of soup of some force, which clearly consciousness can differentiate into all kinds of entities, dimensions, and objects, and so on. So this kind of, I'm just talking about it as the field of intention for not really knowing what it might be, but this intentionality can determine, what aspects of what I'm thinking go onto this like shared canvas that other people can access if they're also on the same frequency. So I think those are like the two main questions that we really have to work on here. So the question of individuality, when does our individuality start to merge like in higher dimensions? So if I'm, if I'm attracted to somebody, if you're attracted to somebody and they represent like your higher self, or they represent aspects of your higher self, at what point, like going further into more rare frequencies, like are you actually maybe already similar, like whether it's part of the same soul group or even sharing the same higher self, right? These are open questions. And then the other major question again is this question of like reliability and discernment of the so-called signal in telepathy. Does it really make sense to consider this as a form of communication, which many people are wont to do? For example, like you hear people say like, oh, it'd just be easier if we could just like talk like telepathically, we can just like bypass language, it'll be so much quicker. And clearly, I think it doesn't really work just like that. Like this is something different. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you think of questions later on, you can drop these in the comments, and we'll try to incorporate that. But yeah, and I think this is all I was going to go over here. But Vida has some really interesting references to bring in too on all of these topics. For example, I haven't even gone into yet like more of like the far-reaching contexts here, like going back like way back in history, for example, to civilizations like Atlantis, for example, which she raised this book that she was reading. And they discussed the concept of autism. I don't know if they were using that term at the time of writing, but the idea that maybe there's like extra DNA present. We now have these theories of like the extra density in synaptic connections in the brain. You know, that when we have newborns, like they've got all kinds of like synaptic connections, and a lot of the process of individuation on a materialist level is just like the so-called pruning of all of these connections, because the brain wants to find the most efficient route to getting a certain result. And then once it gets that, you've got a habit loop, and then you lose all these extra synaptic connections. But I think they were showing that in some autistic people in particular, there is a much greater density still of these synaptic connections. So that's pretty cool. And also just like, again, relating that experience to maybe being in touch with a higher frequency or a lesser density in terms of the experience of living here in the body. In the telepathy tapes, they discuss quite a lot about some of these kids don't feel their body in the same way that a majority of people do. They are less connected. They feel detached in some way from this physical world. And so there's possibly some connection there as well, in terms of like maybe not being able to fully merge with the density of this particular frequency, or the aggregate of the dominant frequencies that are currently, you know, everywhere here on the planet. So yeah, these are a lot of the really cool questions that this raises, and we're going to talk more about this in our conversation, the one I'm having with Vida coming up. Hopefully we might be doing that this week. So just stay tuned, check back on my page, and let me know, for example, your own experiences. Like if you've had experience of animal telepathy, really cool cases, or have you thought about like how we can learn to trust or discern what signals we might be receiving in telepathic experiences? Seems to me that we need to have a really good grounding in our own intuition first, which is another aspect that's also probably highly linked. And we're still using like these really like 3D human concepts. This is the best way that we have so far of talking about it. But yeah, I would love to hear what you guys think, and we'll like keep watching, like watch the rest of these episodes, and you know, maybe I'll even hear from some of the creators, some of the cast, some of the crew, sorry. And yeah, we'll check back in. Okay, so thanks so much for tuning in. I know I think it's Super Bowl Sunday, right? So I think everyone's a lot of people are busy with that. I'm not, I had to remember. So thanks you guys, and I will talk to you soon.